Hey everybody, I'm going to walk you through my example for your final assessment. And I'm going to be using a scenario that was from my high school days because as an adult, I don't get pressured into using substances. That's the nice thing about growing up is that people stop doing that to you. So that's something to look forward to. But this is a scenario in my senior year of high school. I was at a party with some friends and my very best friend, we had been best friend for 6 years. Her name was Jen. We were outside hanging out with friends and she pulled out some cigarettes from her purse and started smoking with a couple other friends. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the how I have now analyzed that situation. Okay, so for step one of the analyzing influences skill, I wanted to start with what the external influences were in that experience. So obviously, my friends were an influence on me in that experience, and I'll talk about the messages I got from them. My family was also an influence, even though they weren't there. Their messages that I had been receiving throughout the years were certainly present. Media, believe it or not, was a pretty big influence on me, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then school was another influence. So those are 4 external influences. And then I also had some internal influences that impacted me as well. So my feelings about smoking, my values and beliefs about it, my perception of what's normal, and then my own wants and needs. And now I'll talk to you about the specific messages each of these influences sent me. Okay, so this is how I've chosen to visualize my influences in that scenario with my friend Jen and cigarette smoking when I was in high school. So I've got my external influences listed here. And I'm actually going to show the relationship between how these 4 external influences impacted and interacted with these 4 internal influences that I've identified here. So we'll start with friends and peers. So the message I was getting from my friends in this scenario, I don't think Jen even offered me a cigarette in that moment, but I still kind of felt like I was supposed to do it. It seemed like they were all expecting me to do it. So I identified that as a negative since it was not helping me to make a healthy choice. However, I identified it as a fairly small influence. I don't think that it would have pushed me too much compared to some of these other influences that I'll identify. So I'm going to draw an arrow here because the way that this influence impacted me was by impacting my feelings. And it made me feel like maybe I was a little bit different in that scenario, or made me feel a little bit excluded or just kind of uncool in that situation. Another way that this interacted with some internal influences is by affecting my feelings, wants, and needs. So even though it wasn't huge for me, I definitely wanted to fit in, as most teenagers do, and I wanted to be part of the group. So them smoking and me kind of being the only one in that circle not smoking made me feel like, what should I do there? Should I smoke to fit in? My next external influence is family. And growing up, I didn't have anyone in my family that smoked when I was a kid. I just wasn't ever around it, thankfully. And it wasn't until about middle school that a couple of my friends' parents smoked and I saw it, but I grew up in those formative years just not being around it. The only other family influence is eventually when I was in high school, one of my older brothers did start smoking, but we really didn't get along well. So it wasn't like I was looking up to him and wanted to smoke to be like him, but he wasn't always super nice to me. And so I think that if he had directly pressured me, things might have been different and I might have been more influenced to smoke maybe in order to be accepted by him. But luckily that didn't happen. So yeah, it wasn't a huge influence, but the fact that no one in my family smoked during my childhood, I think was a really big influence. So I gave it 3 stars here. And the way that this influence interacted with some of my internal influences, I really think that because no one in my family smoked, that sent a message to me about not smoking to prevent disease and take care of my health. So I think it impacted my values and beliefs about smoking and just about taking care of myself in general. And because I wasn't around smoking, it certainly impacted my perception of what was normal. Since no one in my family smoked, it just was normal to not smoke. And so it almost seemed like it was abnormal to be smoking. And so when I was around people who were smoking, it actually made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so that in turn affected my feelings. So you can see how these are kind of interconnected in these ways. Now, school, it was another influence that I identified. It wasn't a huge influence on me, although maybe it was larger than I think it was. But, over the years of being in public school, I got a lot of messages about the dangers of smoking through health classes and other kinds of classes in general. And I think that impacted my values and beliefs as well. And I used that information to decide that smoking isn't really a great choice for me, and that I wanted to try to choose things when I could to take care of myself. Now on to the final external influence. So with media and advertisements, so when I was a kid, there were cigarette advertisements on TV. You'd see TV commercials. Now they're outlawed, so no, they're no longer legal. But it was pretty common when I was a kid, and flipping through magazines, you'd see advertisements with really attractive women and looking like they're having a good time, always young looking. And it just made it look like smoking was pretty cool and glamorous and also like grown up and mature, and it made the person look a little more mature. And I think that was the biggest influence on me there. And I listed this as a medium influence on me. I kind of knew better, but I can definitely say that when Jen lit up that cigarette, I remember saying to her, I don't know why it is, but smoking looks kind of cool. And so that influenced me by making me feel like maybe I should do it to be cool or to fit in, or maybe it'll make me look kind of cool or glamorous or grown up if I do it as well. So I think that was a huge influence on me in that situation by making me feel like I should do it to fit in. All right, so those are all of my external influences that I identified for that scenario. And now for the internal influences, I've already talked about feelings and how they were impacted by those external factors. I felt like that was about a medium influence on me. I definitely felt a little uncomfortable because I was the only one not smoking, and just smoking in general made me feel a little uncomfortable because I wasn't used to it. I talked about my perceptions of norms, and for me, I really feel like that was a huge positive influence on me, since it wasn't a normal thing for me to experience. When I was around smoking, it seemed odd and not very appealing for the most part. So that was a large influence, especially in that situation. So I've also identified that my values and beliefs have been impacted by a number of those external influences. And I think that this influence about not having people in my family that smoked, I think that was a big influence on my values and beliefs, as I mentioned before. Also, sports were a really large influence in my life. I just loved playing sports. I played every season. And I know that I didn't want anything to happen to my ability to play well and perform at my best. And I didn't want to let my teammates down by not being able to run the court or the field or whatever, not being able to keep my wind. So that was another huge positive influence that affected my values and beliefs. And then lastly, I mentioned how my wants and needs were affected by my peers and by the media influences, by feeling like I wanted to do it to fit in. But on the other hand, at that point in my life, I think I was 18 at the time, I knew that I didn't need to smoke to be accepted, and I also knew that I didn't really need to be accepted at all, especially if it was something that was going to make me do something I didn't want to do. And so this influence here, or this want and this need for myself, impacts my values and beliefs about what is right and wrong for me. And as I mentioned before, a need of mine was that I really needed to be healthy for sports. I had just committed to going to Norwich and playing on the basketball team. I didn't want to show up not being able to run and do my best and try to impress the coach and play well. So because I needed to be able to play well, that certainly impacted my belief about taking care of myself. And also, I have asthma. And so that was always an excuse that I could give for why I wasn't going to take part in smoking, because obviously asthma and smoke are a pretty bad combination. It can make asthma worse. And so that need to be able to breathe, it's an important one, but it certainly did impact my my beliefs about taking care of myself to prevent other diseases and making my asthma even worse. So we're on to step 4, which is to increase the positive influences on our health and decrease the negative influences by making some type of plan or strategizing. So for my friends, I mentioned that it was a negative influence because it kind of made me feel like maybe I should smoke to fit in. A strategy to overcome that influence would be to remind myself that in that situation, nobody even asked me to join them smoking, and so I shouldn't feel as much pressure as I was putting on myself. In fact, I really felt like my friends cared about me and would have supported me in not smoking anyway. So it's a good reminder to myself. And then in addition to that, reminding myself that if I ever feel really uncomfortable in a situation, I have the freedom to leave. That can help me to minimize this negative influence. For my family, it was kind of a mixed bag. For the most part, I was getting a lot of positive influence from my family not smoking, but my brother smoking when we were in high school was potentially a negative influence. So one thing that I could do is try to avoid hanging out with my brother, especially when he was smoking. So I would avoid situations where he might pressure or offer it to me. And then just generally speaking, hang out with people that are going to support me in not smoking and who aren't going to pressure or even smoke around me. For the influence of school, that was a positive influence. So in order to increase that impact, I could use those facts that I learned to help me decide what was right and wrong for me when it came to cigarette smoking. And I certainly did. That impacted my values and beliefs a lot. And then for media, remember, it was a negative influence on me because of the glamorous looking models and actresses in those advertisements or TV shows or movies. One thing that was really helpful for me as I was growing up, and it's still helpful, is to remember that the role of media is to sell something and make money off of us. And so because of that, there's inherently going to be a bias present. And so to remember that because they're trying to make money off of us, they may not always have our best interest in mind. So it was helpful for me to remember that the media isn't showing the whole story. They're not talking about the harmful effects of smoking, like wrinkles and yellow teeth and phlegm and smoker's cough and later lung cancer and heart disease. So it's important for me to remember not to be fooled by the glitz and glamour that they were showing, and to remember the real story. To decrease the negative influence and increase the positive influence of feelings, one strategy that was helpful was to remind myself that I didn't have to compromise my own beliefs and my own values in order to be accepted. It was totally fine for me to be myself, and I really didn't run into, in retrospect, looking back, I really didn't run into a lot of people that had a problem with me not smoking. In fact, most people weren't fazed by it at all. It didn't bother them at all. So that was helpful for me to remember that I can still stick to what I think is right for myself, and not have to worry too much about not being accepted. To increase the positive impact of my perception of norms, Anytime I felt like maybe I should do something just to fit in, maybe it seemed like other people were doing it, to remind myself that the statistics don't lie, and most people don't smoke, even though a specific situation might make me feel like I'm the only one who's not doing it. Reminding myself that that's kind of a fabrication in my own mind, and the truth is that most people aren't doing it either. And for my values and beliefs, in order to increase the positive influence there, one thing that I found effective was to just try to be true to myself and do the things that I thought were right for me, and the things that made me feel my best, like taking good care of myself and my health, and being active and playing sports. Those were things that helped me strengthen my belief system and my values about what was right and wrong for myself. And then lastly, to address my wants and needs, it was important for me to remember that the actions that I take at that point in my life and every moment in my life can have a really big impact on my life and my health later on. So not to forget about that, and to remember my belief system in order to help me make decisions in the moment. And then lastly, it was helpful to be around people or situations that helped me to be able to be my healthiest. And if I felt like I was in a situation where I wasn't able to be who I wanted to be, or wasn't able to be the healthiest that I could be, then I could leave that situation and try to find a different one. I hope it was helpful to hear my explanation of my analysis of the situation in my own life. Good luck doing this on your own. I know you can do it, and make sure you're using all of the tools that are available to help you. And there's lots of them in Google Classroom. You can also rewatch this video if you need to. Good luck.